It's great to meet you all virtually. I appreciate your time, and I know that everyone's studying and probably busy. I don't know. Hopefully, everyone's had their dinner for the evening. So I tried to make this presentation as streamlined and succinct as possible. Hopefully, for a lot of you, it's more of just a general overview. But for those folks who maybe haven't considered these things, too much with too much focus just yet, hopefully you're able to learn a little bit as well. Let me know once you can see my screen. Can everyone see? Oh,
Looks good, James. I can see it.
looks good. Perfect. So, of course, my name is James Paigo, Client Solutions Manager at Robert Half Technology. Just a little bit about Robert Half. Founded in 1948, Robert Half pioneered the idea of professional talent solutions to connect opportunities to great companies with highly skilled job seekers. As business needs change, we evolved to offer specialized talent solutions for finance and accounting, technology, of which I'm a team member, administrative, customer support, creative and marketing, and legal fields. And then in 2002, we introduced our subsidiary, Protivity. It's a global independent risk consulting and internal audit service to support companies as they face more strategic business challenges. That's a lot of words, but basically what they're saying is, regardless of industry, whenever our clients need to hire for a particular skill set and they just haven't been able to identify the right candidate on their own, or maybe the work that they're looking to get done is purely project in nature, our team will identify a candidate for them, present them to the client, and then if the skill set is well aligned and everything looks good, then we'd place that candidate with the client. And then sometimes we'll place those candidates in contract for a project, and then down the line they'll go permanent and be a long-term member of that team. So we interact with a ton of job seekers, and we also get a peek behind the curtain, if you will, at what our clients are, exactly looking for, where candidates might miss the mark. We hear all that types of candid feedback. So I'd like to think I have a pretty good sense for what managers are looking for and some of the pitfalls that candidates may run into along the way. So hoping to share some of those insights with the group this evening. About myself, after graduating from a small Christian college in Massachusetts, Gordon College, maybe you've heard of Gordon Theological Seminary. That's like the secondary education, and it's closely affiliated with Gordon College. I struggled myself to find gainful employment. Both my parents worked for my father's small business for about 2 decades, and but between the two of them, they knew very little about the modern job market and the emerging technologies that enable it. So, coming right out of college, I unfortunately had to stack boxes and load trucks in a warehouse for about a year until I met with a career coach who taught me how to format my resume and apply for jobs. I had never heard of a career coach. I just saw an ad. I think it was on Google, and they're local. I'm from Farmington, Connecticut. They were in Simsbury. So I was able to meet with them and procure their services to help me, like I said, write my resume, apply for jobs, create a LinkedIn account, all things that my college did offer, but I just wasn't really aware of it in college. So I was a little bit behind the eight ball, much to my chagrin. I was actually so impressed with the experience that I became a recruiter. That way I could play a similar role for candidates who found themselves in the same position I was. I've been doing that for about 5.5, 6 years now, and it's been really rewarding. Unfortunately, not every candidate that we place is able to land the job, but for those folks who are out of work and desperately looking for a job, it's a great feeling to be able to connect them with a hiring manager or a company who could really benefit from their skill set where they may not have been connected otherwise. Job searches in 2024. I will always believe that networking groups will always be the best job aid tool because the quality of the connections being built. Maybe branching off of that, reaching out to people who also graduated from your college, something like that. Anything that can build that like extra human connection definitely goes a long way. But if you're not super well connected or just haven't been able to get really ingrained with the alumni of your school, leveraging job sites has become probably the most important tool as time goes on. Um, you know, Obviously, I work within the IT technology skill sets, but doing a little bit of research before this meeting, I realized that Indeed actually is a pretty good resource for folks who are coming out of seminary. It seems like a lot more than LinkedIn. They had postings for those types of job, and To the larger point, Indeed is probably my favorite traditional job board. I think that's a great first place to start when you're looking for a job. It's very user friendly. It's also much less costly on the recruiting side. So if you're going to work for an organization, which might be a nonprofit or a church group, something like that, where they're very conscious of budgets and how they're spending money, it's a lot less costly for them to use Indeed. So most people will use that as their one-stop job posting board in order to identify candidates. So I think that'd be a great first place to start for someone who's looking for a job. And then also checking off the ready to work banner is a great way to get noticed. It brings your name to the top of a candidate search list if a hiring manager is looking that way. And then LinkedIn, more of a professional networking site. With LinkedIn, the more time you invest, the better. Most people don't see too much return on LinkedIn because their profile isn't super well built out and current. They have a page, but they're not posting regularly or making connections, so they don't really get the most out of it. But a couple best practices if you are on LinkedIn is to list your personal email and cell phone number in your About Me section. That way, it's easier for folks at the organizations who you'd like to work for to reach out to you. I know that a hiring manager on LinkedIn, they have to pay for the connections that they get. And if they want to look at a candidate's information with their email and phone number, usually they would have to pay for that unless it's posted on the candidate's their bio or their About Me section. So one extra way for them to be able to reach out to you, engage in a conversation. Another thing, maybe not so much, maybe more so geared towards the regular for-profit companies and the jobs that are typically aligned to those companies. Searching all the HR professionals in your geography and sending them a connection. The more connections you have, the better, because you can see what sort of things that they're liking and commenting on. And that's actually how I got my job at Robert Half. I saw someone had liked or made a comment on a job posting that Robert Half had made, and that's a role that wouldn't have been on my radar, any other way. So just being on there, being aware, and having a good network, it's a good way to kind of make technology work for you. And then setting an alert for all the jobs that meet your hiring criteria. It can take a little while to it can take a little while to, how should I say this, to sift through all the jobs that are posted within a geography. It's a little bit tedious, but if you do that search but then you set an alert, you'll get an automatic email sent to you, and it'll have all the information that you're looking for the types of jobs you're looking for. That way those opportunities come to you more so you having to do the research and track them down. A couple of resume do's and don'ts. I know coming out of college, I didn't really know a whole lot about a resume. Looked, pretty bad to be quite honest. But now, after looking at a couple dozen resumes a day for the past 5 or 6 years, I think I'd kind of boil it down to these bullet points, like making sure your resume has a viewer-friendly format. That way, HR and TA professionals who sift through dozens of those resumes daily, it can kind of catch their eye. Usually, the ones that are the best formatted or the easiest to read are the ones that get the most attention. They'll read through it and pass them on to the next stage, which might be presenting it to a manager for them to take a look at. And then when saving your resume, I'd use a file name like, for instance, James Paigo Recruiter Resume 2024. I know hiring managers oftentimes have a couple dozen resumes on their desktop at any given time. Sometimes it'll just say resume or resume 2024. So going that one extra step and having your name a little bit more visible goes a long way, and it just shows detail orientedness, which no one will ever hold against you. When submitting a resume, I'd highly recommend that you submit it in a PDF format. A lot of people type up their resume and format it using a Word doc and submit it in that fashion, but sometimes when coming through the applicant tracking system, it'll actually scramble the lines and the bullets. So all that nice formatting that you invested your time in on the other side, is completely scrambled, hard to read. And sometimes it takes too long to fix the formatting for a talent acquisition professional. So they'll just, move on to the next one as opposed to, taking the time to fix it or reformat it. Say typically no more than 8 bullet points per role. And I'll give an example of this later. and try to keep the resume to 1 to 2 pages, if at all possible. If you can't keep it to 1 to 2 pages, that's fine, but I wouldn't recommend having the resume go back any more than 10 years. 1 decade of time. That's really all most managers are looking back to take a look at anyway, because that's going to be the most recent and relevant. And then ideally, you'd want the bullet points to be something quantifiable. That way, it could just make a little bit more sense in the mind of the person looking at it as to exactly what you did. Um, I still see every once in a while resumes that don't have an email on there for follow up. Highly recommend that you have that at the top. And like I said, towards the end of the presentation, I'll show you a sample example of what I mean. And then also, I can show later as an example is linking your LinkedIn to the header. That way, hiring managers can pull you up instantly. They wouldn't have to search you on LinkedIn or go to Google, find your name, find your LinkedIn. They can just click at it at the top. It'll bring it to your LinkedIn page. Then it's a lot easier for them to reach out to you. Also, maintaining a consistent format throughout. A lot of times, the chief information officers or CFOs or higher level, accounting controllers, even folks who are at that high of a level who we work with and place in consulting engagements with our clients, the resumes might go back 10 to 15 years, and at each different job, the font is a little bit different, the size of the letters and bulleting is a little bit different. It looks very kind of messy and disjointed. So sounds obvious, but I still see it all the time, even from very high level folks who are very intelligent, who just, for whatever reason, they didn't highlight all the words on their page, change the format to have it be the same, and just keep it clear and succinct throughout. And then I'll pause here real quick. If anyone has any questions as to anything I'm saying, feel free to just speak out. You don't have to raise your hand or anything like that. Chances are a lot of the people who are listening probably have the same question, and I don't mind answering questions on the spot. I find it makes it a little bit more lively. So feel free to come off mute and ask any questions as you have them. I'll pause there if anyone has any questions. Nope. All right. No problem at all. Moving on. Interview best practices. Sounds obvious, but I still interview maybe 5 or 6 candidates a week who ask them about a previous role and they just have a lot negative to say, and then I ask them about the role prior to that. Once again, they have a lot of negative things to say, and it doesn't really look great in an interview when your last 3 roles you just have nothing positive to say about those employers. Even if it's incorrect, it kind of comes off like the candidate might be the one who's the common denominator. So anytime you're speaking about leaving a previous employment, it's highly recommended to put some sort of positive spin on it. Obviously, you're not working there anymore for a reason, but the interview is definitely not the best time to bash a previous employer or anything like that. And then showing up on time and having done research on the opportunity, it can kind of stop an interview dead, admittedly, when I can't the hiring manager is asking one of our candidates, what do you know about the company? And they don't really know anything. They haven't Googled it, haven't read the About Me page. And a lot of our clients are, higher education groups. They're very mission driven healthcare companies. So, they take their mission and what they do very seriously. So if someone hasn't done a whole lot to research, to them, that can kind of be a red flag. So definitely good to slow down, read about the mission, the organization, and if there's a bio about the folks who are already working there, it's great to read that as well. Then one thing that I was doing maybe early on when I first graduated college, I just wanted a job, so I didn't have a whole lot of questions. I was just hoping to get an offer and start as soon as I could. But I think my lack of questions at the end of the interviews oftentimes conveyed disinterest. So I'd always recommend asking a couple questions at the end just to convey your interest, or if the interviewer was very clear about the role, you don't have a lot of questions, you could say something like, I think I really understand the role at this time. I don't have any questions. Hope you don't take that as an indicator of my disinterest. It seems like a great role. I just don't have I don't have any questions to ask. Something along those lines. I'd also recommend bringing 3 to 4 copies of your resume to any interview. Chances are the folks that are interviewing are the ones who are leading the organization. They're very short on time. Their meetings are back to back, so they might not have had any time to print it. So if you could show up with some copies of your resume, pass it out to the group. Usually interviews are 2 or 3 folks, sometimes up to 4. So maybe you could hang on to that copy and refer to it on your own. That way, you just look prepared, keeps things moving along smoothly, and it makes for a much better interview, just in case they didn't have time to print it. I'd also always plan to arrive 45 minutes early, especially if if you're interviewing somewhere in downtown Hartford, let's say. Parking can be tricky, finding the right floor, finding the right building, all those sorts of things, and you never want to go into an interview feeling rushed. It's better to get there, maybe wait, relax for 30 minutes or so. Read your notes on the company. Make sure you have your copies of the resume, all that kind of stuff. That way, you're not putting any undue stress upon yourself. Another thing that it was a mistake I was making, when I was first out of college interviewing for jobs, but I was so eager to finish the interviewer's sentences just because I wanted them to know that I knew that where their mind was going, I understood what they were saying, and I wanted them to know that. But if anything, I think I was just kind of frustrating them, interrupting the cadence of their questions, interrupting the cadence of what they're explaining to me, and it kind of broke up the interview and didn't come off great. So, just a best practice: always let that interviewer finish their sentence before formulating your own answer. And then, if interviewing virtually, make sure to set a good professional background or a clean, non-distracting space. I couldn't tell you how many times I've, interviewed a candidate. They threw up a background for my interview with them, but then when I put them in front of the client, they're interviewing from their bedroom. You could see their bed in the background. There's a pile of dirty laundry on the bed, or there's golden retrievers barking in the background, and it was a little bit distracting, made them come off a little bit disorganized. So you definitely want to avoid anything that even approximates that impression. Making sure the computer is an appropriate distance away. What looks like a normal distance for you on your screen, it might look like someone, it's being filmed on like a set of binoculars for the interviewer, and like they can only see, your eyes and your nose, and they can't see your forehead or mouth or anything like that. So it might be good to do a test meeting with, one of your friends or colleagues just to make sure that the optics look good. Because some interviewers, they're it's a little awkward to give that feedback on the spot, so they might not say anything, and you might interview and optically it just didn't look as good as it could have been if you double checked. If you have pets, always try best to keep them as quiet as possible. I remember a time a couple of years ago where I had a candidate. They were giving good answers. They're well qualified for the job, but they had two golden retrievers who were howling and getting each other riled up. I could hear their like nails, rattling off the hardwood floors of their must have been their kitchen or living room or something like that. And it was just very distracting. It broke up the flow of the interview and the questions and the cadence. And you know, I don't want to say that's the reason the candidate didn't get the job, but it didn't. It certainly didn't help their cause because it distracted, and with it being only a 30-minute interview, they weren't able to elaborate on all the questions that they were asked. And then this one, I could probably take a page out of this book today. If you have not used the software before, make sure to download it and do a trial run ahead of time. Same day if possible. I mean, I could use my example today. I use Zoom, at least a couple times a month, usually Microsoft Teams, but I think I used Zoom as recently as Monday last week. It worked fine. But today, for whatever reason, the download wasn't correct, or my computer, it's just being kind of wonky. Caused me to show up a little bit late. If this was an interview, that would have been a tough look for me. So always good to, test the software same day if time permits. Even if you used it last week, even if you used it a couple days ago, you just never know. And, showing up late to an interview, it's tough to come back from. So definitely I recommend downloading it ahead of time if you can. Couple common interview questions. I think for the line of work you all would be looking to get into, this might look a little bit different, but you could kind of tweak for your industry and desired jobs. But the dreaded, why do you want to work here? That's a tough one to answer. Everyone wants to have a livelihood and a place in society and a way for them to, provide for themselves. But, those don't necessarily make for the best answers, even though they are honest. So try to find a way to identify with the mission of the organization that you're interviewing with. That way you could knock that question out of the park is always good. Tell me about your biggest failure, how you came back from it. It's a tough one to answer, but I still hear that one quite a bit. So it'll be good to have an answer prepared for that. What do you know about our organization? That's a very common one as well. got to if you do the research, that's a very easy one to knock out of the park. But if you haven't done any research on the organization, it's a tough one to answer. What is your understanding of the role? What are your salary requirements? Maybe a little less relevant for the line of work you'd all be looking to get into, but if you ever did want to know, you could always go on Indeed.com for salary data. Or if down the line you're the one hiring for a job and you have to hire an IT professional for your organization or accounts payable, accounts receivable, staff accountant, anything like that. It's always good to have Indeed in your back pocket just to check on salary data. What are some of your weaknesses? That's a very common one. Where does your motivation come from? Reasons you left previous roles. These are all things that people ask. So good to rehearse those answers ahead of time. Make sure that one, they're true to you and true to the situation, but also something that you could speak articulately on. Post interview strategies. This one's kind of fallen out of favor, but I always recommend that candidates write a thank you note. I think it goes a long way. And you may be interviewing for a job, and your candidacy looks very similar in competitiveness to, two or three other candidates. But usually, the candidate who sends a thank you note just looks a little bit more well prepared, a little bit more serious, and it helps you stand out. But worst case scenario, you spend a couple minutes on that. It definitely won't hurt your cause. Connecting with your interviewers on LinkedIn. I recommend this, early and often in the process, maybe before you've interviewed. But for whatever reason, if after an interview you haven't heard any feedback whatsoever, um, connecting with your interviewers on LinkedIn is like a nice soft touch approach to kind of pinging them, putting you back on their radar, as opposed to calling on the phone and asking for an update. Which if it's weeks down the line, if you haven't heard, that might make sense. But if it's a couple days later, I think that's just a good way to stay top of mind without being overly bothersome. Accepting the role during the interview. Oh, gotta go back one. Accepting the role during the interview. This is also something that I recommend, especially for the line of work that I'm in, the IT professionals that we're placing. Typically, it's for contract roles, which move very quickly. They may get an offer on Wednesday, start a role on a Monday, pending a background check or whatever compliance that the client requests. But especially for those roles like a contract that move quickly or a position that an organization needs to fill quickly on the permanent side, I don't think it would be out of place to tell the interviewers, if it's true to you, that you really like what you've heard so far, you believe that you'd be a good fit for the role, and if you were lucky enough to get an offer, you'd be comfortable accepting. That puts that comes off, I think, very confident without being overly cocky. And then for the folks that are interviewing, if they liked you and they feel the same way about your candidacy, it makes it easy in their mind to know that if they spent their time to draft up an offer, that they would that you, the candidate, would accept. And then clearing out your voicemail. Like I said, for what I do on the contract IT side of things, offers oftentimes come back same day, and our clients need an update quickly because there may be other people who are interviewing with that client. So if this person doesn't accept, we have to move on to the other candidate and confirm if they accept. That way our client can get the support that they need. And there has been times throughout my career where we're calling and calling a candidate, but their voicemail is full, and we try to send them a text, nothing goes through. So I'd always recommend clearing out your voicemail. That way, if someone does call you and you miss it, they can leave you that voicemail. They get the message that maybe you received the offer, and then you won't lose any time in the acceptance stage. Some additional resources. So Trish McGrath, she's the career coach who I had alluded to at the beginning of this call. She doesn't pay me to promote what she does. I just happen to be a very happy customer of her service. I think it went a long way to kind of changing the trajectory of my life and my career. I was a history major coming out of college. I never thought I'd be on the IT consulting side of things. That's never a life or a job that I would have ever imagined that I'd be doing. But a lot of the job satisfaction that I have now, and stability in my life and my career, came from my meeting with her and just getting her candid feedback on my resume, my interview style, all those sorts of things. And even if you don't need to pay her to write your resume or write your LinkedIn or do any in-depth career coaching, she offers these links to her blog posts, which are a couple pages long, but they're funny, they're loaded with good information, and best of all, they're free. So For whatever reason you're getting a lot of phone interviews, but you're not getting any in-person interviews or any offers after that, she has a great blog for 10 tips on phone interview best practices. So I would say after I first read through all these blogs, I think I read through all of them about 5 times. Every job that I applied for and interviewed for after, I got. So I think I was 0 for 10 coming out of college. And then after working with her, within a few weeks, I had 3 job offers. And I've, used these tips to prep my candidates to this day. So it's free, but it's also great information. This is the sample resume format that I send. Jason, I'll send this to you as a Word document. That way you could copy and paste a little bit easier. But I think it's just a clear, concise, easy format for someone who doesn't have a resume. You're wondering how to space things, where to put things. This is what I'd recommend just to get started. And despite what professional resume writers may tell you, there is no perfect format to a resume. A lot of people just need kind of a jumping off point, and I think this should suffice to give you that. And then a couple examples that I alluded to at the beginning of the presentation. Having the LinkedIn right at the top, that way someone can click on it. If you clicked on this, it would bring you right to my LinkedIn. I put the town that I live in. I don't put the street address that I live at. I've seen some candidates do that. Wouldn't recommend it. Just town and state. That's fine. Your cell phone and then your email. I typically recommend a Gmail. I think the functionality is a little bit better when doing Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams, that kind of stuff. And it's just a little bit more modern. I've seen candidates who might have a very old, antiquated email account. And for what we do on the technology side, our clients always want candidates to be on the cutting edge. So, I'd be lying if I said that certain biases probably didn't come into the mind of the interviewers about the age of someone's email versus their competence with technology. So what I usually recommend to candidates is just sign up for a Gmail. It's well known, well used, and the functionality is pretty good. A little summary at the top, and then I typically break it up this way: company, city, state that company was in, when you were there, title, and then a couple bullet points about what you did. And then instead of doing like JAN 2024, typically recommend just writing out the whole word. I don't know. Does it make a huge difference? No, not really. But you never know. You don't want the hiring manager to think you're cutting corners or anything like that. So that little extra step, I think, goes a long way in the mind of the interviewers. And then your education at the bottom or the top, whichever you like. College name, town, state, the date you graduated, and then your degree. And then I always recommend doing 12-point font. Calibri font, I think, looks good. And then I do maximum width on the margins. I've also seen people who submit their resume and everything's like center aligned, or the margins are very wide. And what would be a 1-page resume is like a 2.5 page. So if you can widen it out, get more on the same piece of paper, that's always recommended. And that brings us to the end. So we can jump in, answer any questions. Am I still sharing screen? I don't think so. I'm in the browser, so some of the features are lost.
Well, James, this is great. Do we have any questions for James? Not to prolong it, but I had a few, James, and
Sure.
oh, wait, no, we got someone in the chat has asked how to address age-related questions. Hope you're not getting age-related questions during your search, but
So like, let's say you're interviewing, and then if the interviewer asked someone's age, do I have that correct?
is there a way you'd like to elaborate it so we know exactly what he should ask about? Uh, in the chat, or more because one is an older individual.
Well, yeah, I wish I could say we lived in a world that there wasn't certain biases towards the age of candidates. You know, Especially in the public sector, it's probably a little bit more common, but I just do everything you can to give yourself a fighting chance. Like I said, there's certain things that could date someone, like if you have your resume and it goes back 25 years, I'd probably recommend just going back 10 or so. Or if you're using an email that was very popular, maybe in the late 90s, let's say, I think it might be good to set it up as a Gmail, something like that. So anything you can do to just decrease an opportunity for them to have any bias towards your age, I would typically recommend. But if what I find is that those sorts of situations, as long as you could land the virtual or in person interview, and you have a chance to kind of let your personality shine, and you know, hopefully at that point you'll be judged based on the quality of your answers as opposed to your age or anything like that. So there's no magic bullet there, but like I said, just do everything you can not to give them an opportunity to have any bias, I suppose.
That's great. I actually had a question myself, Jane.
Sure.
Um, one of the things that, as a hiring manager myself, that I've found, and I get a little bit concerned about, is the screening questions that now have a sort of hard barrier between maybe hiring managers and potential candidates. And sometimes they'll say, do you have a driver's license? For instance, could be a deal breaker question.
Yeah.
Sometimes, more often, I think of an applicant where maybe technically uh, the hiring places said, well, you have to have an associate's degree, you have to have a bachelor's degree.
Mhm.
But there could be candidates who maybe they don't have a bachelor's, but they've had some college, and
Yeah.
in fact, they would be a good match. For those people, especially on the other side, who think, I really would be a good match, I just don't have that one qualification. Is there any recommendation for how to, I don't know, get around it? Or is that kind of just a challenging limitation of how they do screening now? Or what do you
Yeah.
think?
And it depends on the organization. Like sometimes the client will give me a job description, and it's drafted up by the HR team, not necessarily the IT manager or the
Right.
chief information officer. And the job description, it may read like a need to have, a nice to have, and then a why not.
Yeah.
It's like a third of them are just why not. It's like we'll just put it on there, it makes sense. Like I think I had a client some years ago, and one of the need to have, call it, was a bachelor's degree in accounting. You know, there aren't a whole lot of people graduating with accounting degrees like there were decades ago.
Right.
People are getting more so out of public accounting, and they wanted to get into finance or data and analytics. Just the flavors kind of changed a little bit. So I presented to them a candidate who had been a bookkeeper for 10 or 12 years at one company, didn't have an accounting degree, but they had done all the work. So that candidate, I think they maybe even had seen it at some point. They didn't apply, and maybe kind of sad because they were a good fit for it. They just didn't apply. But I was able to connect them with that client, and were able to get them placed, and everything worked out. So I think that sometimes people make up stories in their head about why they shouldn't apply to a role, and they think maybe the person on the other side, like, why would this person apply? Like, oh, what a waste of time. I
Right.
don't think they really see it that way. If you see a role, it sounds like something that you can do and you'd be interested in, I would apply. And then cover letters are a great way for you to articulate
Yes. Right.
maybe why you'd be a good fit for it that maybe isn't necessarily evident on the resume. I know cover letters get a lot of hate, but I think for that purpose especially, there's a lot of value in being able to, just type up a little bit about yourself, why you think you're a good fit, and then you could kind of address those red flags, if you want to call it that, in the application itself.
That's really helpful. Um, anybody else have any questions? Well, I'm going to allow the lack of questions to just reflect the quality of James' presentation and thoroughness. So before we all, oh, wait, we have one question from Katie. How do you deal with having very little experience on a resume? I think that's the
Yeah,
easy
I mean,
question. Yes.
yeah, everyone's run into
Yeah,
that at one point. That's what I
sure.
ran into when I had first
Good
graduated.
question.
Um, definitely depends on the type of role that you're going for. I suppose you just have to look at the big picture. Like, I mean, for me in particular, coming out of school, I had a history degree. Didn't necessarily want to be a teacher. I didn't feel really called in that direction. And short of that, like with a history degree, you could either be a lawyer or some sort of Indiana Jones type character, like an archaeologist or something. I'm not sure. I didn't want to do any of those things. I just like history and wanted to study that because that was my passion personally. Um, but I guess every job that I got, I just tried to look at the big picture. What are the things that I like to do? And just try to get jobs that would keep me moving in that direction, if that makes sense. A lot of people's first job out of school is fairly humble. It's not going to be the job they're going to be doing forever or long term. I would just see, just get something on the resume that's a step in the right direction that you're comfortable doing. And, what I tell candidates and maybe what I told myself early on, as long as you're learning while you're on the job or you're making money or, you're building connections, it's probably a good place for you. If you're doing none of those things, maybe not the best fit. Maybe it's time to move on to something else. But
Yeah.
I would just say, just start somewhere, if that makes sense.
James, if I could add, as someone who now has, 20 years in a career in higher education administration, I didn't think I'd be here, right? And I think that's so often the case for a lot of careers. You don't necessarily think, oh, it's going to be this direction, but then you get an entry job, and you find that there's a career that's gratifying, it's meaningful, and so I think sometimes you don't even know where you're going to head out when you hit that first job or one of those entry
Yeah.
level
Or
positions.
sometimes it takes a bad job that causes you to fantasize about all the things that you'd rather be doing. Like
Yeah.
I remember when I was working in the warehouse, very miserable job. I give a lot of credit to the people who made a career of that.
Yeah.
But I remember for me, I'm like I would fantasize like what I really want in a next job. I was so miserable that I would just fantasize the whole time about what I'd rather be doing. And in my mind, I'm like, I really want a job that's in air conditioning. I really want a job where I could sit down and not be on my feet all day, and a job where I didn't have to lift anything.
Yeah.
I just those are the things that were playing in my mind. And then when I was applying to jobs, I saw a role as a bank teller, and I'm like,
Yeah.
that encompasses all those things. It's in the air conditioning. Uh, it's I could sit in a chair all day. I'm not lifting anything, and for me, in that point in time, that was a good next step. And then after I got that job, I realized that I'd rather be doing more on the client-facing sales side of things, and then I pivoted to a role in recruiting. So
Yeah.
at each job, even if it's not a good job, it'll steer you in the right direction, and things just have a way of working out. I know it's hard to believe, maybe coming out of college and being a little bit lost on your next move, but things things do end up drifting in the direction that makes sense.
So Josh has now asked um, how to get job experience. Specifically, is an internship important? That's a great question because I always wonder that myself.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely envy my college roommate Udoka. I think he had an internship seemingly every year since sophomore year of college, and then right out of school he landed a great job as in public accounting at KPMG. So
Right.
for him, he was way ahead of the game. He was very aggressive about getting internships in college. I did not have an internship in college. Maybe that's why I had a hard time finding a job immediately after. But I'm not sure what grade you're in now or what stage you are in the process, but I would take any internship experience you could get. If it's paid, that's amazing. If even if it's unpaid, at the very least you're learning something, you're figuring things out. And then once you do apply for, a non-internship, just a regular permanent job, you have a couple references that can speak on your behalf, which is super helpful. But the companies that I've seen, they post their internships on Indeed and LinkedIn, Indeed especially. So if you type in internship and then the geography into Indeed, it'll help you identify those roles. And I mean, that season for internship, usually it's when the year kind of kicks off. So quarter one, January, February, March, that'd be a right now it'd be a great time to start applying to those. So I would definitely search for internships because they are out there, especially now that the hiring market in the public sector, it's been kind of slow this year and the previous year. So instead of hiring permanent folks, long-term permanent hire, they're bringing in interns. It makes sense, give some people experience, but then also give the hiring manager the flexibility of having folks who they don't necessarily have to make a permanent employee. So definitely be aggressive about getting those internships. That's a great way to speed up your career trajectory.
Great points. Um, uh, I'll just say this. One of the things I had in internship, I'll just plant a seed for anyone who's interested, is after college, I did a Catholic year of volunteer service. It was unpaid. They gave us a house to live and a car to use, but that was a wonderful experience to work with the Vincentians, get a teaching educate, start teaching right out of college, and I suppose it was an internship in many ways. And I was in a professional setting in a Catholic school, and that helped me be able to move into some of sort of talk about education with experience later on. So, well, James, thank you so much. Just so
Of
everyone
course.
knows, James offered this in gratis as a way of saying thank you to the relationship we already have with Holy Apostles and Robert Half. So thank you, James, for coming this evening, sharing your experience and professionalism and insight. Like I said, this will be recorded, so this will be on our career service website. I'm sharing that now on our chat. And please also keep in mind to check out James' reference that he talked about and the resources there. But also, please know, we do have a free resume and cover letter support
Oh,
person
great.
who will do this for free for you. So if you're needing support with a resume and cover letter and you'd like to have support, you'd like someone to give you some pointers and tips and actually, look over your resume, that person is available. It's on the career services link, so you can have that. If any of you are undergraduates, the person doing it now was the admissions counselor, Chantel LaFortune. So if any of you worked with her, you'll know how good of a writer she is and how professional she is. She has really great insights onto these things. So do that if you're in the process of doing a resume or cover letter. And then again, James, thank you so much. Really, it's
Thank you for
wonderful to have
having
your
me.
thoughts. Yeah,
Yeah, no, it's an honor to be here. Obviously, I'm a person of faith myself, so I really respect people who go to seminary and get into full time ministry. That's an amazing career path, and I appreciate anyone who does that. So anything I can do to help along the way, please let me know. If have a resume, you want me to take a look at it, help with the formatting. I'm not a gifted writer, so I would have to defer to the resume writer and career
yeah,
services over there at Holy Apostles, but if you need a little help with the formatting, I'm qualified to do that. So
thank you
anything I can
so
do to help
much.
would be an honor.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for everyone's time this evening. And again, final thanks to James again. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a good
Take care,
evening,
everyone.
everyone.